The morning sun had barely crested the Texas horizon when Preston Cole pushed open the barn door and found a woman curled up in the hay, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her dress torn at the hem and stained with what looked like dried blood. He froze, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, but something stopped him from drawing it. The woman was sleeping so deeply that she did not stir at the creak of the barn door, and in the golden light filtering through the wooden slats, he could see she was young, maybe 20 or so, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and now spread across the hay like spilled ink. Her hands were blistered and raw, her boots worn clean through at the soles. Preston stood there for a long moment, taking in the scene. This was 1883, and Tascosa, Texas was still wild enough that finding a stranger in your barn could mean trouble of any variety. But looking at this woman, all he could see was someone who had run as far as her legs would carry her, and then a little bit further. He cleared his throat, and her eyes flew open. They were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight, and they were filled with pure terror. She scrambled backward through the hay, her breath coming in short gasps, and pressed herself against the barn wall. "Please," she said, and her voice was hoarse, like she had been screaming or crying or both. "Please do not send me back." Preston held up both hands, showing her they were empty. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "This is my barn, my property. I just want to know who you are and what happened to you." The woman stared at him, her chest heaving, clearly trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she said, "My name is Willa Thompson. I ran away from my husband in Amarillo. If you send me back to him, he will kill me." The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. Preston had seen enough in his 32 years to know that some men were no better than rabid dogs, and sometimes a woman had no choice but to run. "Did he do that to you?" Preston asked, nodding at the bruises he could now see on her wrists, the swelling around her left eye that was half hidden by her hair. Willa nodded once, a sharp, small movement. Preston let out a long breath. He knew what the law would say about a runaway wife. He also knew what his conscience would say if he turned her over to a man who beat her. The two things were not the same, and he had never been much good at following laws that did not sit right with his soul. "You have got one choice," he said, and watched her tense. "You can stay here and work for your keep. I need help around the ranch. The house needs cleaning, the chickens need tending, and I am behind on about 1,000 things since my last ranch hand moved on. You work hard, you earn your place here fair and square, and anybody who comes asking, I will tell them I have not seen you. Or you can leave now, and I will give you some food and water for the road, and we will call it square. Those are your options. I will not send you back against your will." Willa stared at him like he had just spoken in a foreign language. Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped at them angrily with the back of her hand. "You would lie to protect me. You do not even know me." "I know enough," Preston said. "What is your answer?" She did not hesitate. "I will stay. I will work. I promise I will earn my keep." "All right then," Preston said. He walked over to the barn door and pulled it open wider, letting in the full light of morning. "Come up to the house. You can clean up and get some food in you. We will figure out the rest from there." Willa stood up slowly, wincing as she did. She was taller than he had thought, and even through the dirt and the fear, he could see she had been beautiful once and probably still was underneath it all. She limped toward him, favoring her left leg, and he held out his arm for her to steady herself. She hesitated before taking it, and he understood. Trust was not something that came easy when someone had spent it all on the wrong person. They walked across the dusty yard to the ranch house, a modest 2-story structure that Preston had built himself 5 years ago when he had finally saved enough money to buy this land. It was not much, but it was his, and he took pride in it. Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A bachelor's home. Preston pointed Willa toward the washroom and told her there was a pump out back for water. He went to the kitchen and started a fire in the stove, putting on coffee and pulling out some bread and preserves. When Willa emerged 20 minutes later, she looked like a different person. She had washed her face and hands, pinned her hair back up, and done what she could to make herself presentable. The bruises stood out more starkly now against her clean skin, and Preston felt a flash of anger at the man who had put them there. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. He poured her a cup of coffee and pushed the bread and preserves toward her. Willa sat down gingerly and wrapped her hands around the coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. She did not touch the food at first, just sat there looking at it. "Go on," Preston said. "You need to eat." She picked up a piece of bread with trembling fingers and took a small bite. Then another. Then she was eating like she had not seen food in days, which Preston thought she probably had not. He sat across from her and drank his own coffee, watching her. When she finally slowed down, he said, "How long were you married?" Willa set down the bread. 6 months. He was different before the wedding. Kind, charming. My father thought he was a good match because he had money and prospects. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out he had debts and a temper, and I was just another thing he thought he owned. Where is your family now? My parents died of fever 2 years ago. I have a brother, but he moved to California before they passed. I have not heard from him since. Willa looked down at her hands. I had no one to go to. That is why I stayed as long as I did. But 3 nights ago he came home drunk and he had a knife, and I knew if I did not leave then, I would not get another chance. Preston nodded slowly. How did you end up here? Amarillo is a day's ride at least. I walked most of it. I stole a horse the first night, but it went lame and I had to turn it loose. I have been walking since then, staying off the main roads, sleeping wherever I could find shelter. She met his eyes. Your barn was the first place I felt safe enough to really sleep. You walked that far in 3 days. Preston could not keep the surprise out of his voice. Fear is a powerful thing, Mr. Cole. Just Preston, he said. If you are going to be working here, we might as well skip the formalities. Preston, she repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. They finished their coffee in silence, and then Preston showed her around the ranch. It was a modest operation by most standards. He had about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, a few pigs, and enough land to graze it all and then some. The main house, the barn, a bunkhouse that stood empty, and a chicken coop made up the buildings. The chickens need feeding every morning and the eggs collected, Preston explained as they walked. The pigs need slop twice a day. I handle most of the cattle work and the horses, but there is always mending to be done, meals to be cooked, and the house could use a woman's touch. I have been living like a hermit for too long. Willa looked around at everything with sharp, assessing eyes. I can do all of that. I am a good cook and I know how to sew and clean. My mother taught me before she died. The bunkhouse is empty, Preston said, pointing to the small building. You can stay there. It has a bed and a stove and a door that locks from the inside. You will have your privacy. Willa turned to look at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. Thank you, she said quietly. You have no idea what this means to me. You are going to earn it, Preston said, but his voice was gentle. This is not charity. This is work for wages and a roof over your head. We are square that way. Square, Willa agreed. That first day set the pattern for the ones that followed. Willa threw herself into the work with a fierce determination that impressed Preston. She rose before dawn to feed the chickens and collect eggs, and she had coffee ready by the time he came in from checking the cattle. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, mended his clothes, and cooked meals that were better than anything he had tasted since his mother had died 10 years ago. In return, Preston kept his word. When a man came through town a week after Willa arrived, asking if anyone had seen a woman matching her description, Preston looked him straight in the eye and said he had not seen anyone like that. The man was not her husband, just someone hired to find her, but Preston sent him on his way with no information and no apologies. Willa heard about it from Preston that evening when he came in for supper. She went pale and set down the spoon she had been using to stir the stew. He was here. In Tascosa, he was. And now he is gone, headed east toward Clarendon. I told him we had not seen anyone matching your description. Willa sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs. He will tell my husband. Robert will know I came this way. Maybe so, Preston said. But Texas is a big place, and you are on my land now. Anyone who wants to get to you will have to come through me first. She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart do a strange thing in his chest. Why are you doing this? You could get in trouble for harboring me. Preston sat down across from her. My father was a hard man. He believed in rules and laws above all else. When my mother got sick, he would not let her rest because there was work to be done. She died tired, Willa. She died knowing that her comfort and her life mattered less to him than his damned pride. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I swore when she died that I would never put rules above what was right. The law says a woman belongs to her husband. But you are not property. You are a person. And I am not going to hand you over to someone who hurts you just because a piece of paper says I should. Willa was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. I will never be able to repay you for this kindness. You already are, Preston said. This place has not felt like a home in a long time. It is starting to again. The weeks turned into months, and summer gave way to fall. The work continued, hard and constant, but there was a rhythm to it that Preston had not realized he had been missing. Having another person around, someone to talk to over meals and in the evenings, changed everything. Willa proved to be not just capable but clever. She reorganized the kitchen so everything was easier to find. She started a vegetable garden that yielded more than Preston had thought possible from the dry Texas soil. And she gentled a half-wild horse that he had been ready to give up on. She had a way with animals, a patience that he admired. They fell into an easy companionship. After supper, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the prairie, talking about everything and nothing. Willa told him about her childhood, growing up in a small town in Kansas, learning to read from her mother's old books, dreaming of a life that was bigger and brighter than what she had. Preston told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the years of hard work and loneliness, about the satisfaction of making something with your own 2 hands. You ever wish you had someone to share it with? Willa asked one evening, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. Preston looked over at her. She was sitting in the rocking chair he had made last winter, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the horizon. The setting sun painted her in shades of gold and amber, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. I did, he said honestly. I was engaged once, about 7 years ago. Her name was Charlotte, but she decided ranch life was not for her. She married a banker in Dallas, and I heard she is very happy. You still love her? Preston thought about it. No, I thought I did at the time, but looking back, I think I loved the idea of her more than the reality. She wanted a different life than I could give her, and that is all right. People want what they want. Willa was quiet for a moment. I thought I wanted security. A husband with means, a comfortable home, children someday. That is what I was taught to want. But I learned that security does not mean anything if you are terrified in your own home. "What do you want now?" Preston asked. She turned to look at him, and the expression on her face made his breath catch. "I want to be free. I want to wake up without being afraid. I want to do work that matters and be treated like I have value." She paused. "I have that here. You have given me that." Preston wanted to tell her that she had given him something too, that coming home to a lit house and a warm meal, and her smile had changed something fundamental in him. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with the knowledge that she was still legally married, still in danger, still not truly free. Instead he said, "You have earned it." The weather turned cold in November, and with it came the first real test of their arrangement. A early winter storm blew in from the north, bringing snow and ice and winds that howled around the buildings like living things. Preston spent most of his time making sure the cattle were sheltered and the horses were safe, working until his hands were numb and his face felt frozen. Willa kept the home fires burning. She made hot coffee and hearty stews. She heated bricks to warm the beds, and she worried. Preston could see it in the way she watched him come in from the cold, in the way she insisted he sit by the fire until the feeling came back into his fingers. On the third night of the storm, Preston came in later than usual. One of the cows had gotten stuck in a drift, and it had taken him hours to dig her out and get her back to shelter. He was exhausted, frozen through, and his hands were so cold he could barely feel them. Willa took one look at him and sprang into action. She helped him out of his frozen coat, sat him down by the fire, and pulled off his boots. Then she disappeared and came back with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. "You are going to lose fingers if we do not warm them up properly," she said, kneeling down in front of him and taking his hands in hers. Preston tried to protest, but she gave him a look that brooked no argument. So he sat there while she carefully warmed his hands in the water, massaging his fingers gently until the blood started flowing again. It hurt like hellfire, that pins and needles sensation of thawing flesh, but he barely noticed because he was too focused on Willa's face, bent in concentration over her task. She was so close he could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the faint freckles across her nose that he had never noticed before. Her hands were gentle but firm, and there was something almost unbearably intimate about the way she cared for him. When she was satisfied that his hands were warming up properly, she looked up and their eyes met. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Willa drew in a sharp breath and sat back on her heels. "You need to eat something," she said, standing up quickly. "I will get you some stew." Preston watched her go, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He was falling in love with her. Maybe he had been falling for weeks now and had just been too stubborn or too cautious to admit it. But sitting there in the warmth of his home, with his hands still tingling from her touch, he could not deny it anymore. The problem was, he had no idea what to do about it. The storm passed, and December arrived with clear, cold days and nights so crisp the stars looked close enough to touch. Preston found himself watching Willa more than he should, noticing the way she hummed while she worked, the way she laughed at his bad jokes, the way her whole face lit up when she was happy. He thought about kissing her about 100 times a day and talked himself out of it 101. She was here because he had given her safe harbor, not because she wanted anything more from him. The last thing she needed was another man who thought he had a claim on her. But sometimes he caught her watching him too, and there was something in her eyes that made him wonder. Christmas came, and with it a rare day of rest. Preston had never been much for celebrating, but Willa seemed determined to make something special of it. She made a feast with their stores and the preserved vegetables from her garden, and she had somehow fashioned decorations from scraps of cloth and bits of pine. Preston gave her a new pair of boots, sturdy and well made, to replace the ones she had worn to nothing. She cried when she opened them, and then she gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, with careful, even stitches and buttons she had carved from bone. They ate their Christmas dinner in companionable silence, and then Willa said, "I have not been this happy in years. Maybe ever." Preston looked at her across the table. "Neither have I, Preston," she said, and then stopped. She seemed to be gathering her courage for something. "I need to tell you something. My husband, Robert Thompson, he is not going to stop looking for me. Men like him, they do not let go of what they think belongs to them. And I am still legally his wife, no matter how far I run." "I know," Preston said. "If he finds me here, he will make trouble for you. He might even try to hurt you. I could not bear it if you got hurt because of me." Preston reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than practical purpose, and he felt her startle at the contact. But she did not pull away. "Willa, I made you a promise the day you arrived. I promised I would not send you back, and I meant it. Whatever comes, we will face it together." "Together," she whispered, and he saw hope and fear warring in her eyes. "There is something else," Preston said. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I have come to care for you a great deal, more than I probably should. More than is maybe appropriate given the circumstances, but I needed you to know." Willa's eyes widened. For a moment she just stared at him, and Preston braced himself for rejection. Then she said in a voice that shook, "I care for you too. I have for weeks now. But I did not think I had the right to feel that way, being married to another man, being here under your protection." "Your marriage is not a real marriage," Preston said fiercely. "Not when it was based on lies and kept by force. The law does not see it that way. Then the law is wrong." They sat there holding hands across the table, and Preston felt like they were standing at the edge of something huge and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "What do we do?" Willa asked finally. "I do not know," Preston admitted, "but I know I do not want to lose you. And I know that what we have here, this life we have been building, it means something." "It means everything," Willa said. They talked late into the night, trying to figure out a path forward. Divorce was possible but difficult, and it would require Willa to confront Robert in court, to make public accusations that might or might not be believed. Worse, it would alert him to exactly where she was. "There has to be another way," Preston said. "I just need to think." But thinking did not produce easy answers, and as winter deepened, the question of what to do hung over them like a storm cloud. In January, Preston had to make a trip to Amarillo for supplies. It was a risk, going to the city where Robert Thompson lived and worked, but the ranch needed things that could not be gotten in Tascosa. He thought about leaving Willa behind, but she insisted on coming with him. "I am tired of hiding," she said. "And besides, you might need someone to watch your back." Preston could not argue with that logic, so they set out together on a cold January morning, the wagon loaded with goods to trade. Amarillo was bigger than Tascosa. A bustling cow town with actual streets and multiple saloons and a hotel that had glass in all its windows. Preston and Willa kept their heads down and went about their business quickly and efficiently. They had nearly finished loading the wagon with their purchases when Preston heard a voice that made Willa freeze beside him. Well, if it is not my runaway wife." Preston turned to see a man standing behind them. He was tall and well-dressed, with the kind of good looks that probably charmed people who did not know better. But his eyes were cold, and there was cruelty in the set of his mouth. "Robert Thompson." "Willa," Robert said, his voice dripping with false pleasantness. "You have led me on quite a chase, my dear. I think it is time you came home." Willa stepped closer to Preston. "I am not going anywhere with you." Robert's expression hardened. "You are my wife. You will do as I say." Preston stepped between them. "The lady has made her wishes clear." You need to leave." Robert looked at Preston as if seeing him for the first time. "And who might you be? The man who has been hiding my property. I am Preston Cole, and Willa is not property. She is a person, and she has made her choice." "Her choice?" Robert laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "She does not get a choice. She is my wife, legally bound to me, and if you have been sheltering her, then you are breaking the law." A small crowd had started to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Preston was aware of people watching, of the delicate social calculus of this moment. In the eyes of the law, Robert was in the right. A wife belonged to her husband, but Preston had never cared much for laws that were unjust. "I am not going with you, Robert," Willa said, her voice steady despite the fact that Preston could feel her shaking beside him. "You can drag me to court if you want, but I will tell everyone what you did to me. I will show them the scars. I will make sure the whole town knows what kind of man you really are." Robert's face flushed red. "You ungrateful little witch, I gave you everything." "You gave me bruises and terror," Willa shot back. "That is all you ever gave me." Robert lunged forward, his hand raised to strike, but Preston was faster. He grabbed Robert's wrist and twisted, forcing the other man to his knees. "You are not going to touch her ever again," Preston said quietly. "Do you understand me?" Robert wrenched his arm free and stood up, breathing hard. "This is not over. I will have the law on you, Cole. You will go to jail for this, and she will come back to me." "Then I guess we will see what happens," Preston said. He helped Willa into the wagon and climbed up beside her. As they drove away, he could see Robert standing in the street, his face twisted with rage. "He is going to make good on his threat," Willa said quietly. "He is going to go to the law." "Let him," Preston said grimly. "We will figure it out." But figuring it out proved harder than he had hoped. When they got back to the ranch, Preston spent the evening pacing the kitchen, trying to come up with a plan. Willa sat at the table watching him, her face pale but determined. "I should leave," she said finally. "I should go somewhere far away where he cannot find me. California, maybe, or Oregon. If I am gone, he cannot make trouble for you." "No," Preston said immediately. "I am not letting you run again. There has to be another solution." "What if there is not?" Preston stopped pacing and looked at her. "Then we will deal with whatever comes together. I meant what I said, Willa. I am not giving up on this, on us." Willa stood up and crossed the room to him. She reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle against his rough cheek. "I do not deserve you. You deserve so much more than you have gotten," Preston said. He covered her hand with his own. "I wish I could give you everything you should have had, safety, freedom, a life without fear." "You have given me that," Willa said. "These past months here with you, I have been happier than I knew was possible. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that." Preston could not help himself anymore. He bent his head and kissed her, gently at first and then with all the pent-up longing of the past months. Willa kissed him back, her arms coming up around his neck, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know the timing is terrible and the situation is complicated, but I love you, Willa. I have for a while now." "I love you too," Willa whispered. "I think I have since the day you gave me a choice instead of an order." They held each other in the quiet kitchen, and Preston made a decision. He would fight for this, for her, for them, whatever it took. The next few weeks were tense. Preston half expected the sheriff to show up at any moment with a warrant or a summons, but days passed and nothing happened. It seemed Robert Thompson had decided to bide his time, which was somehow worse than an immediate confrontation. Preston and Willa went on with their work, but everything had changed between them. There was an openness now, an acknowledgement of what they meant to each other. Preston found excuses to touch her, a hand on her back as they passed in the hallway, fingers brushing when they worked side by side. Willa bloomed under the attention, smiling more, laughing more, letting herself hope. In February, on a day when the sun was warm enough to melt the lingering snow, Preston took Willa riding out to the far pasture. He wanted to show her the land, all of it, the full scope of what he had built. They rode for hours, talking and laughing, and Preston felt more at peace than he had in weeks. This was what life could be, he thought. This easy joy, this companionship, this love. They stopped to rest by a creek that ran through the property, and Preston helped Willa down from her horse. She stood there looking out over the land, her face turned to the sun, and she was so beautiful it hurt to look at her. "Marry me," Preston said. Willa turned to stare at him. "What? Marry me?" he repeated. "I know you are still legally married to Thompson, and I know it is complicated, but I do not care. Marry me anyway. We will have our own ceremony, just you and me and whoever we want to witness it, and then we will figure out the legal side of things later. Preston, we cannot just ignore the law." "Watch me," he said. "I am tired of letting other people's rules dictate how we live. You are not really his wife, not in any way that matters. You are the woman I love, and I want to spend my life with you, so marry me, please." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "You are insane. Is that a yes?" "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, you crazy man, I will marry you." Preston whooped and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and it felt like a promise. They planned the ceremony for the first week of March. Preston rode into Tascosa and found the circuit preacher who came through once a month. The preacher, a kind old man named Reverend Williams, listened to Preston's story and agreed to perform the ceremony, legal or not. "In the eyes of God, a marriage that is based on force and violence is no marriage at all," Reverend Williams said. "I will join you and Miss Thompson with a clear conscience." Preston also invited the few neighbors he trusted, good people who had known him for years, and who had welcomed Willa without judgment. There was old Samuel Porter, who ran the general store, and Mary Chen, who owned the boarding house, and the Rodriguez family, who had the ranch to the west. On the day of the wedding, Willa wore a dress that Mary Chen had lent her, a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She had wildflowers in her hair, and she was the most beautiful thing Preston had ever seen. They stood in the front room of the ranch house, with their small gathering of friends as witnesses, and pledged their lives to each other. Preston slipped a ring on Willa's finger, a simple gold band that had been his mother's, and when Reverend Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed his bride with his whole heart. Afterward, they had a meal together, simple but joyful, and their friends toasted their happiness. It was not a legal wedding, not in the eyes of the state of Texas, but it was real in all the ways that mattered. That night, for the first time, Willa stayed in the main house. She moved her few belongings from the bunkhouse into Preston's room, and they lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms. "Are you scared?" Willa asked softly. "Terrified," Preston admitted. "But I have never been surer of anything in my life." "Me neither," Willa said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Thank you for choosing me, for fighting for me." "I will always fight for you," Preston promised. "Always." They made love that night with a tenderness that took Preston's breath away. It was Willa's first time being with someone who cared about her pleasure as much as his own, and Preston took his time, learning what made her sigh and what made her gasp. When it was over, they lay tangled together, and Preston thought that this, right here, was what happiness felt like. Spring came early that year, bringing green grass and wildflowers and new calves. Preston and Willa worked the ranch together, partners in every sense of the word. They were happy in a way that felt almost dangerous, like something too good to last. And then, in late April, Robert Thompson came back. Preston was out mending a fence when he saw the riders approaching. There were 3 of them, and even from a distance he could tell that the man in front was Robert Thompson. Preston felt his stomach drop. He rode back to the house as fast as he could. Willa was in the kitchen making bread, and she looked up in alarm when he burst through the door. "He is here," Preston said. "Thompson, and he brought men with him." Willa went pale, but she straightened her shoulders. "I am not running." "I am not asking you to run," Preston said. He pulled his rifle down from where it hung over the door. "But I need you to stay inside. Let me handle this." "Preston, no, I will not let you get hurt because of me." "Willa, please trust me." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Be careful." Preston stepped out onto the porch just as the 3 riders came to a stop in front of the house. Robert Thompson dismounted, and Preston saw that one of the other men was wearing a sheriff's badge. "Preston Cole," the sheriff said. He was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and tired eyes. "I am Sheriff Daniels from Amarillo. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of harboring a fugitive wife." "Willa is not a fugitive," Preston said evenly. "She is a woman who left an abusive marriage." "That is for the courts to decide," Sheriff Daniels said. "Right now, I need you to come with me peacefully, and I need you to turn over Willa Thompson to her lawful husband." "That is not going to happen," Preston said. Robert stepped forward, his face twisted in a sneer. "You have no choice, Cole. The law is on my side." "The law is unjust," Preston said, "and I will not hand over my wife to you." "Your wife," Robert laughed. "She is my wife, you delusional fool." The door opened behind Preston, and Willa stepped out onto the porch. She stood beside Preston, her chin up, her eyes blazing. "I am not your wife, Robert," she said clearly. "Not in any real sense. I left you because you beat me and terrorized me. And I married Preston because I love him and because he treats me like a human being instead of property." Sheriff Daniels looked uncomfortable. "Madam, I understand this is difficult, but the law is the law. You are legally married to Robert Thompson, and this marriage to Preston Cole is not recognized." "Then your laws are worthless," Willa said. The 3rd rider, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "She is right." Everyone turned to look at him. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s, with dark hair and a face that looked strangely familiar. "Who are you?" Preston asked. The young man dismounted and walked forward. "My name is William Turner. I am Willa's brother." Willa gasped. "William, but you were in California. I thought I would never see you again." "I was in California," William said, "but I came back when I heard you had disappeared. I have been looking for you for months." He turned to Robert. "And in that time, I have been doing some investigating into you, Thompson. Did you know that you were already married when you married my sister?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Robert said, "That is a lie." "It is not a lie," William said calmly. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "This is a marriage certificate from Missouri, dated 1878. You married a woman named Catherine Morse in St. Louis. The marriage was never dissolved, which means your marriage to my sister is not legal. It never was." Sheriff Daniels took the paper and examined it. His expression grew grim. "This looks legitimate." "It is legitimate," William said. "I tracked down the courthouse records myself. Thompson is a bigamist. His marriage to Willa is void." Robert's face had gone from red to white. "You cannot prove anything." "I can and I will," William said. "I have already filed papers with the court in Amarillo. Your marriage to Willa Thompson is being annulled as we speak." Preston felt like the ground had shifted under his feet. He looked at Willa, who was staring at her brother with a mixture of shock and hope. "Is this true?" she whispered. "It is true," William said gently. "You are free, Willa. You always were. His claim on you was never legal." Sheriff Daniels looked at Robert with disgust. "Looks like you are the one who will be facing charges, Thompson. Bigamy is a crime." Robert sputtered, trying to find words, but there was nothing he could say. The sheriff motioned to the third rider, who turned out to be his deputy, and together they placed Robert Thompson under arrest. As they led him away, Robert shot one last venomous look at Willa. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Willa said firmly. "It has been over for a long time. I just did not know it yet." When they were gone, Willa turned to her brother and threw her arms around him. "William, I cannot believe you are here. How did you find me?" "It was not easy," William admitted, "but I knew you would head west if you ran, and I heard stories of a woman matching your description working on a ranch in Tascosa. I came here to find you, and when I saw Thompson and the sheriff heading this direction, I decided to follow." "You saved us," Preston said, extending his hand. "I do not know how to thank you." William shook his hand. "Take care of my sister. That is thanks enough." They went inside, and William told them the whole story. After leaving for California, he had made his fortune in the gold fields and then started a freight business. When he had heard that Willa had married, he had been happy for her, but when she had stopped writing, he had gotten worried. He had come back to Kansas only to find their parents dead and Willa gone. "I started asking questions," William said, "and I did not like the answers I was getting. Thompson had a reputation, and not a good one. So I started digging into his past, and that is when I found the marriage certificate from Missouri." "Why did he marry Willa if he was already married?" Preston asked. "Money," William said bluntly. "Our parents left Willa a small inheritance. Not much, but enough that a man with debts might find it attractive. He married her to get access to her money, and when he had spent it all, he had no more use for her except as someone to terrorize. Willa was quiet, processing this. So I was never really his wife." "Never," William confirmed. "Which means your marriage to Preston, while unconventional, is the only real marriage you have ever had." Preston reached for Willa's hand and squeezed it. "We will make it legal," he said. "We will go to the courthouse and do it properly this time." "I would like that," Willa said, smiling through her tears. William stayed with them for a week, getting to know his sister's new life and her husband. He approved of Preston immediately, telling Willa in private that she had chosen well. "He is a good man," William said. "And he clearly adores you." "I adore him too," Willa said. "I never knew marriage could be like this, a partnership built on respect and love." Before William left to return to California, he made sure that all the legal paperwork was in order. The annulment went through without a hitch, and Robert Thompson was convicted of bigamy and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Preston and Willa went to the courthouse in Amarillo and got legally married, with William as their witness. This time, when Preston slipped the ring on Willa's finger, it was with the full blessing of the law and society. But it did not feel any more real than it had the first time they had pledged themselves to each other. What mattered was not the piece of paper, but the love they shared. Life settled into a new normal after that. William visited once a year, always bringing gifts and news from California. The ranch prospered under Preston and Willa's joint management. They added more cattle, bought some new horses, and expanded the house to make room for the family they hoped to have someday. In the fall of 1884, Willa told Preston she was expecting a baby. He was so happy he picked her up and spun her around, just like he had on the day she agreed to marry him. "Careful," she laughed. "You are going to make me dizzy." "I am already dizzy," Preston said. "We are going to have a baby, Willa. A baby." Their son was born in the spring of 1885, a healthy boy with Preston's dark hair and Willa's amber eyes. They named him James, after Preston's father, a gesture of forgiveness and moving forward. Preston proved to be a devoted father, doting on his son and helping Willa with all the endless tasks that came with caring for an infant. He would walk the floor with James when the baby fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until James fell asleep. Willa watched them together and felt her heart swell with love. This was the life she had dreamed of, but never thought she would have. A home filled with love and laughter. A partner who respected her. A child to nurture and raise. 2 years later, they had a daughter. They named her Rose, and she was as fierce and independent as her mother. Preston was completely wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. As the children grew, Preston and Willa told them the story of how they met. They did not hide the hard parts, the fear and the running and the fight for freedom. They wanted their children to understand that love was worth fighting for, and that doing the right thing was more important than following unjust laws. James and Rose grew up on the ranch, learning to ride and rope and work the land. They were happy children, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. The years passed in a blur of work and joy. The ranch continued to prosper. Preston proved to have a good head for business, and Willa's careful management meant they always had enough saved for lean times. They bought more land, hired a few ranch hands, and became respected members of the Tascosa community. In 1895, when Willa was 32 and Preston was 44, they had one more child, a surprise baby boy they named William, after Willa's brother. Uncle William came out from California for the christening and stayed for 3 months, enchanted by his nephew and his niece and nephew. "You have built something beautiful here," William told Preston one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. "I am proud to call you my brother." "The feeling is mutual," Preston said. He meant it. William had saved them all those years ago, and Preston would never forget it. As the new century approached, Preston and Willa settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. They still worked the ranch together, though they had good help now. They still talked every evening on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. And they still loved each other with the same intensity they had felt on that day when Preston had found Willa sleeping in his barn. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Willa would turn to Preston and say, "You ever think about how different things could have been if you had sent me away that first day?" And Preston would pull her close and say, "I think about it all the time, and I thank God every day that I made the choice I did." "It changed both our lives," Willa would say. "It gave us both our lives," Preston would correct. "The real ones, the ones worth living." In 1903, when Preston was 52 and Willa was 40, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, counting from that first unofficial ceremony in their front room. All 3 children were there, along with Uncle William and his new wife, and half the town of Tascosa. Someone asked Preston to make a speech, and he stood up, uncomfortable as always with being the center of attention, but willing to do it for Willa. "20 years ago," he said, "I found a woman sleeping in my barn. She was running from a life that was killing her, and she had nothing but the clothes on her back and the determination to survive. I gave her a choice that day. Stay and work or take some supplies and go. She chose to stay, and that choice changed both our lives." He looked at Willa, who was smiling at him with tears in her eyes. "But the truth is, she gave me a choice too. She gave me the choice to be the man I wanted to be, instead of the man the world expected me to be. She gave me the choice to fight for what was right, instead of what was legal. And she gave me the choice to love her, which has been the easiest and best choice I have ever made." Preston raised his glass. "To Willa, the bravest woman I know and the love of my life. Here is to 20 more years and then 20 more after that." Everyone cheered and drank, and Willa came over to kiss Preston, not caring who was watching. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," he said. "Always have. Always will." The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy. James grew up to be a fine rancher, eventually taking over much of the daily operation of the ranch. He married a local girl named Sarah, and they gave Preston and Willa their first grandchildren. Rose, true to her independent spirit, became a teacher and married a doctor from Amarillo. She visited often with her husband, and she and Willa would spend hours talking about books and ideas and the changing world. Young William, named for his uncle, showed an aptitude for business and eventually went to work with his namesake in California, learning the freight business. Preston and Willa grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the Texas landscape they loved. But they never lost the spark between them, the love that had been forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by years of partnership. In 1920, on a warm spring day much like the one when they had married for the second time, Preston and Willa sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Preston was 69, Willa was 57, and they had been married for 37 years. "You have any regrets?" Willa asked, as she sometimes did. Preston thought about it, as he always did, wanting to give her an honest answer. "No," he said finally, "not a single one. Everything I have, everything I am, it all started the day you chose to stay. I would not change a moment of it." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder. "Neither would I, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." "They brought us together," Preston agreed. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. The air was soft and warm, carrying the smell of grass and wildflowers and home. "Preston," Willa said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a choice. For seeing me as a person instead of property. For loving me when I had forgotten how to love myself." Preston turned to look at her, this woman who had shared his life for nearly 4 decades, who had borne his children and built his home and filled his days with laughter and love. "Willa," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you were the one who gave me everything. You walked into my barn with nothing but courage and determination, and you turned this house into a home. You turned my existence into a life. Thanking me is like thanking the rain for falling or the sun for rising. Loving you is just what I do. It is who I am." Willa reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle and familiar. "We were lucky to find each other." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Preston said. "That was fate. That was meant to be." As the sun set on another day, Preston took Willa's hand in his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. They had built a good life together, a life filled with love and hard work, and the satisfaction of making something meaningful from nothing. Their children were grown and happy. Their grandchildren were healthy and thriving. The ranch that Preston had built with his own hands had become a legacy that would last for generations. But more than any of that, they had each other. They had chosen each other every day for 37 years, and they would keep choosing each other for as long as they both lived. Years later, when Preston was 75 and Willa was 63, Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Willa holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, this man who had given her freedom and love and a life worth living. But she did not despair, because she knew that what they had built together would endure. Their children carried on the ranch. Their grandchildren grew up hearing stories about the cowboy who found a woman in his barn and gave her a choice that changed both their lives. Willa lived for another 10 years after Preston died, still sharp and strong, still tending her garden and reading her books and visiting with her ever-growing family. When she finally passed in 1935, at the age of 73, she was surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She was buried next to Preston on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Texas sky they had both loved so much. On her headstone, her children had inscribed the words Preston had spoken to her on their 20th anniversary. "Here lies Willa Cole, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, the bravest woman we knew." And next to Preston's name, they had added, "Here lies Preston Cole, who gave a woman a choice and found his life's purpose." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, justice over law, and each other over everything else. And though the years passed, and the world changed, and the Wild West became just a memory, the story of Preston and Willa endured. It was told around dinner tables and on front porches, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes the most important choice you can make is to give someone else a choice. Preston had found Willa sleeping in his barn on a spring morning in 1883, desperate and afraid and running for her life. He could have turned her away. He could have sent her back to the man who hurt her. He could have followed the law instead of his conscience, but he had not. He had given her a choice: stay and work or take supplies and go. That simple act of recognizing her humanity, of treating her as a person with agency instead of property to be returned to its owner, had set in motion a love story that would span decades and touch generations. Willa had chosen to stay, and in doing so she had chosen not just safety but love, not just survival but a life filled with purpose and partnership and joy. Together they had built something that lasted: a ranch, a family, a legacy. But most importantly, they had built a love that was strong enough to withstand anything, because it was founded on respect and choice, and the simple, radical belief that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, still tell the story of how it all began. The barn where Preston found Willa still stands, carefully maintained as a reminder of where their family story started. And on quiet spring mornings, when the sun comes up over the Texas prairie and paints everything in shades of gold, it is not hard to imagine a young cowboy opening the barn door and finding his whole future waiting for him in the hay. It is not hard to imagine the moment when he made the choice that changed everything. The choice to see a desperate woman not as a problem to be solved or property to be returned, but as a person deserving of compassion and agency. It is not hard to imagine love growing in the space between fear and freedom, nurtured by hard work and honest communication, and the simple act of choosing each other, every single day. That is the legacy Preston and Willa left behind. Not just land or cattle or buildings, but the knowledge that love is a choice, and that the right choice, made at the right moment, can change not just two lives but generations to come. Their story reminds us that heroism is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is as quiet as giving someone a choice when the world says they have none. Sometimes it is as simple as treating someone with kindness when they have known only cruelty. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that one small act of decency can blossom into a love that lasts a lifetime and beyond. A love that becomes the foundation for everything good that follows. Preston and Willa understood this. They lived it every day of their lives together. And in doing so, they proved that even in the hardest of times, in the wildest of places, love can not only survive but thrive, as long as it is built on the bedrock of mutual respect, shared choice, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves to be free.